So I know that one of the things that people worry about with cheesecake is how will they eat an entire cheesecake. But when we make cheesecake, we generally cut it into quarters and freeze it in quarter servings so that it's easy to defrost it and use it in smaller portions. But then also for this holiday, for Shavuot, cheesecake fits the bill of a dairy dessert. And I was actually curious about why we want to eat dairy desserts on Shavuot. So I Googled it because I have no access at home to any sources that would have informed me of this without the use of technology. And I found out that the earliest reference to using dairy on Shavuot is actually Rabbi Aaron HaKohen in 1300. And he said that we should eat milk and honey on Shavuot as we hear the Torah on Shavuot, and it tastes like milk and honey to us. So it is supposed to mimic the experience that we have when we hear the Torah. And later scholars also connected it to the Song of Songs, chapter 4, verse 11, where a presumably male writer is talking about his bride, but you never know. And no?
Not necessarily.
Oh, not necessarily a male writer, but somebody is talking about their bride and says, "Your lips drip, flowing honey, O bride, honey and milk are under your tongue." So, much like kissing a lover or listening to the Torah, we are on Shavuot to eat something that brings us immediate pleasure and fulfillment, spiritual and otherwise, which is why we eat dairy on Shavuot. I never knew that. So, cheesecake also fits that bill. When I make cheesecake, my best friend is actually my blender. I have a Vitamix, and if you have made cheesecake before, you might know there's generally 3 steps. The Vitamix can actually do all 3 of those steps, and I really like it for that reason. But you can also use a food processor or a regular blender, or you can use a mixer, and it'll work just as well for you. So the first step, of course, to a good cheesecake is the base. And for that, we're going to use graham cracker, but you can also use pretty much anything that will crumble. So when I made this for my sister's wedding, I actually used gluten-free graham crackers. So the whole thing was then gluten-free. You can also use chocolate cookies if you want to have a chocolate base. The important thing is you want about 8 ounces of cracker. So for graham crackers, I happen to know that that's 15 graham crackers. So I'm going to put 15 graham crackers in my blender. If you don't have a blender or a food processor, which would be also an easy way to do this, you can also just literally put it in a plastic like Ziploc bag and take like a mallet or a rolling pin and crush the graham crackers until they're like a fine powder. You don't have to make it too fine, like a kind of like a scrabbly sand, rocky sand will do. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Because it's going to get put in butter, and then you're going to be 10, 11, 12, putting it in, baking it, and all that. So it doesn't have to be perfect. It just needs to have like that crumbly texture. All right. If I'm counting correctly, I need
take like chocolate chip.
more.
Clark, you literally take like Chips Ahoy cookies and blend those.
You can use, yeah, so you can use literally anything that if you crush it up, it'll create like a crumbly texture. So Chips Ahoy cookies would definitely work. The only thing I would say with the Chips Ahoy cookies is they have high sugar content. So I'm going to be adding brown sugar to this. In fact, I'm going to do it right now. If you're going to use something that has a high sugar content, like an Oreo, then you're probably going to want to add less correspondingly. But also, it's such a small part of the overall dessert that I wouldn't be too concerned about it. So in addition to these graham crackers that I put in here, I'm going to put in 3 tablespoons of brown sugar. And basically, I'm just going to whirl this up. And this is going to be, and then I'm also use here? I have a stick of butter here that I have at room temperature. This is actually the first time I've put it in room temperature. Usually I just melt it because I forget to bring it to room temperature. So this will be an experiment for me. All right. And this is going to be maybe a little bit of an unpleasant, grinding, loud sound. So I'm going to have Alex phone. All right. So, as I said, you're looking for a crumbly texture, and if you don't have something like this, and you're using you're whacking a bag to get it all to that texture, you're really not looking for an even thing so much as just something that you're going to be able to press into a crust. Now I have here a buttered springform pan. Now, the easiest way to make a cheesecake is with a springform pan because it's easy to take the cheesecake out of the pan after you're done. However, you can actually make a cheesecake in any kind of pan. I recommend a 9-inch pan, and you want something with high sides. But if you didn't have something that was high, that had high sides like this one, you could reduce I'll tell you how in a few minutes. You can reduce the quantity proportionally and make a shorter cheesecake, and it should be fine. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to press my graham cracker crust into the pan. Now this is actually a lot of graham cracker crust, which I like personally because it makes it pretty foolproof, so that there's really no chance that you're going to have the cheesecake not fully come out of the pan at the end, or that you're going to have it leak too much. But that being said, it's a lot of graham cracker crumbs. So if you look at yours and you want something shorter and you feel confident that you can get it out, then all the more power to you. I like to do it, actually, maybe, Alex, this would be a good time to try our close-up feature. I like to do it where I press it in, and you really have to press it. We have here. And you really have to press it because you want it to be very densely packed. I actually like to do it as a very uneven crust on the sides, so because I think that it gives it a really cool look when you take it out of the pan, if it's not like all the way up in every single place. So like I'll probably have parts where it's like basically there's nothing on the sides for the crust, and other parts where there's quite a bit, and I think that that just makes it look rustic, and it makes it look like you made it at home. But you can get very fancy with this, and if you want to, I'm sure you could watch YouTube videos on how to make it. But the most important thing is really to have one even layer all the way around the bottom, because the point of this is to provide a barrier so that your cream cheese filling, which is very delicate, doesn't get scorched by the bottom of the pan. All right, so I'm gonna call that good enough for my crust.
Sorry, as a backup, can you use like the frozen pie crust we use for the apple pie and stuff? If you don't have all this stuff.
Yeah, so you can use an apple pie. You can use a pie crust, but it's not. I'm sure that would be delicious, but that is not a cheesecake base. And the reason that I would caution you against using specifically a pie crust is that this is a very wet, the cream cheese filling is a very wet thing, as opposed to like a pie, which presumably the pie crust would have opportunity, if you're baking a pie, to get hard and crusty on the bottom, which is a good textural element. So that's why cheesecake uses a crumbly, already crusty thing like a graham cracker crust. So they actually do sell graham cracker crust in stores. And you can see I just gave my blender a little bit of a rinse there, by the way, because I'm about to use it for my cream and cheese filling. Nothing too fancy because it's all going in the same place, right? So I would recommend you buy, if you're going to buy a crust, buy a graham cracker crust. Buy one that's like a dedicated crust for cheesecake. But if you have pie crust and you want to use it, you certainly could. I just don't know how good the end result would be as opposed to something that has a better texture.
Okay.
So if you are using a mixer, then you should do this in the opposite way that I am doing it. If you're using a mixer, you're going to want to start with your cream cheese. You're going to want to use your paddle attachment to whip up your cream cheese and get as much air into it as possible. Ideally for this, your cream cheese would start at room temperature, but you can also gently heat it in your microwave if you forgot to take it out of your fridge. So once you have that cream cheese at a lighter, airier texture, then you would add your vanilla, you would add your sugar, and I'm assuming here that you have my ingredient list, but let me also just give you the proportions. It's going to be 4 packages of cream cheese for a total of 32 ounces of cream cheese, 1.5 cups of sugar, 4 eggs, and a teaspoon of vanilla. So if you are using your mixer, then you're going to start with the cream cheese, and then you're going to beat in the sugar, and then you're going to slowly add the eggs one at a time. And the reason for that is to prevent the cream cheese from getting clumpy, and then add your vanilla. Now, I'm actually going to do it in the opposite way because I need the liquid of the egg to get the blender started so that it doesn't seize up with my cream cheese. And even then, I might need to wrestle with it a little bit, so you guys are going to have to just stick with me. Now, as I mentioned before, this is a very versatile recipe, and I've actually suggested 3 of the many ways that I will make this recipe to you. And so some of you might be making the chocolate chai recipe. Now, if you are making the chocolate chai recipe, then in addition to adding all the things I just mentioned, you are also going to add at the very end, or if it's in the blender with your sugar, add your spices, your various chai spices. All right, so I'm putting in my eggs. I'm going to add a teaspoon of vanilla. Okay. I am actually not, I will show you a chai cheesecake later. I'm not making one right now, so I'm going to add my sugar and my cream cheese, probably in the opposite order as I'm thinking about it. And maybe one and then the other. No, okay. And then I'm going to, again, mute this so that I don't blast your ears out while I engage my blender. So if you are cooking with me, you can take this time to do the same. If not, please enjoy watching me struggle with my blender. Okay, welcome back. So, as as I said before, it's really important that you try to avoid lumps in your cheesecake, because this will not actually be something that just bakes out as you bake it. So if you are using a mixer, you really want to mix it for a while until you can see the like evenness of the mixture. If you're using a blender or a food processor, you want to do it until you've created a real vortex and you can see that it's completely regular. And at that point, what you're going to do is you're going to put it into your graham cracker crust. There's no need to bake your graham cracker crust ahead of time, which I know is something that some people recommend doing. I've never felt the need to do it. So I'm going to pour it all in there. All right, that's good enough. Sorry. All right, and then you can definitely smooth out the top. You don't want it to be like really uneven, but also it's going to smooth a bit of it, and you're going to end up doing something to the top of it. So don't worry too much about that. Okay, so now the next thing that we're going to do, I'm actually going to show you a really cool topping idea, but the next thing that most of you are going to do, unless you're making the raspberry filling, is you're going to put this cheesecake into your oven. Now, your oven should be at 325 degrees. I'm sorry, I probably should have mentioned that at the beginning. And what you're going to do is you're going to bake your cheesecake until your cheesecake is no longer a soup, but still quite jiggly. It's very important that you not overbake your cheesecake, because cheesecake will get chalky and dry, and the whole important part of the cheesecake is the mouthfeel. So what you're looking for is sort of like a not sloshy texture when you move the pan around, but you also don't want it to be totally firm. You want to see the entire thing kind of I'm not going to be able to do this in a way that's dignified, so you're just going to have to deal with it. You want it to go, ooh, 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 ooh. You don't want it to go, ooh, ooh.
You kind of want it.
Those are my technical terms for it, but
So
you want it
to be like Jell-O?
Yeah, you want it to be a Jell-O texture, where like when you move the pan, not just the middle, but the entire thing kind of gives a little, oh. Keep in mind that when you take the cheesecake out of the oven, the cheesecake is going to continue baking because it's a very large, dense thing. So you want to give it a little give for it to not fully overbake once you've even taken it out of the oven. So it's okay if there's a little bit of like, whoa at the center, because it's gonna get more like, oh, and less like, whoa. Anyway, so I lost my train of thought with all of my wiggling and jiggling. Oh, right. So it's going to probably be something like an hour to an hour and 15 minutes, but it also depends on what you're putting into it. And there are some things you can do that I'm not doing here that would make it take longer, or also whether or not you use an ice bath. I think personally that when you're making a full-size cheesecake, an ice bath is not necessary, and one of the reasons I feel that way is I don't have a pan in my kitchen large enough to put my cheesecake into an ice bath, so I've never actually like been able to do it. But also the reason to use an ice bath is basically to protect against what I just described, like that if you overcook it, you might get a chalky cheesecake. It'll give you like an extra 20 minutes of grace if you put it in an ice bath before it like really overcooks. So you can avoid using an ice bath by just keeping an eye on it and checking it like every 15 minutes or 10 minutes. But if you're nervous, an ice bath can really help you to prevent overcooking your cheesecake. All right, so some of you are going to be putting your cheesecake in, but I'm actually going to demonstrate how you would do the raspberry fillings that I suggested. And for those who may not have seen my ingredient list, for the raspberry filling, you're going to want 6 ounces of berries and 2 tablespoons of sugar. The berries can be frozen. You just have to either defrost them like out on your counter, or I always just use a microwave because I never remember to defrost them on my counter. So this is the 3rd step that I would use my blender for. I would put the berries in the blender with 2 tablespoons of sugar and blend them together. And then I would strain the mixture through like a very fine sieve. I actually did that before I got on the call today because I didn't want to clean out my blender while all of you were sitting here watching me. So I have it here. And I said to use raspberries, but I'm actually using cherries because there were no raspberries at the store. So you can do your raspberries one of 2 ways. You can either just take like a small spoon and drop little bits of it onto your cheesecake. This is a cheesecake that hasn't been baked yet. Or if you really want to be fancy, you can have a little piping bag like I do and pour your filling into it. Woo! And then make a huge mess. And then kind of dribble it. Alex, can you do the, yeah, thanks. Oh, yeah, the close-up thing. Thanks. So then you're going to kind of, and this looks like I messed it up, but it's actually going to come out fine. You're going to kind of dribble it over the cheesecake, like in little drops, like this. Okay? You don't necessarily need to use all of the filling. Some of it you can hold back to either let your husband eat it while you're cooking, eat it yourself. We are equal opportunity here, or to allow for some sauce to put on top of your cooked cheesecake. But anyway, so it should look something like that when you're done with it, okay? And then what you're going to do is you're going to take a stick like so, and this is actually a chopstick, but you could use like a skewer or something like that, and you're going to kind of work through it like this in random places to give it like a feathered texture, okay? And you know, some people will be much better at this than me because I'm not a particularly artistic person. Like, you know, you could do like a beautiful, like even whatever. But this is what I generally do, is just do it at random angles like this, and it always comes out really, really beautiful once it's baked. Okay, so that's that. All right. So now that you've made your cheesecake, I'm going to put this cheesecake in the oven. I should have said this before, and it's not too late if anybody is actually cooking this along with me. You are, even if you're not using an ice bath, going to want to put a pan under your cheesecake because the cheesecake has butter in the crust, and the butter is going to melt and leak out of the bottom of your springform pan. So unless you want to clean melted burned butter off of the bottom of your oven, or in my case, have my husband do it for me when that happens to me, you should put it in a pan. All right, so I'm putting this in my oven. All right, and then I'm going to take this. Now, as I said, that's going to cook for like an hour and a half. But this is what I made yesterday, which is a chocolate chai cheesecake. Well, it's not chocolate yet, but it's chai. And it's everything you would want a cheesecake to be. So the thing that you want to keep in mind with the cheesecake, as you can see, this is one that I took out when it was jiggly, and it had a real jiggle to it, not a slosh, but a jiggle. You can see that I threw it right into the refrigerator. I let it sit overnight. It pulled away from the pan, right, as it cooled. All right, and it also got this big gash in the top, which is very normal for a cheesecake. So the easiest way to take a cheesecake out of the pan is to let it sit. Overnight is fine, but you could also do it for like a couple of hours in the fridge until it's completely cool. At that point, it will have pulled away from the pan, and with some minor, well, fairly major actually, fairly major knife hook around the edge, you should be able to just pop it out. Now, the way that you can tell that I don't do this for a living is I'm just gonna hope. Yeah, there we go. Came right out. You can see there's like minimal stuff on the edge of my, oh, sorry. You can see there's minimal stuff on the edge of my pan. So that's my cheesecake right there. So this is my chocolate chai one. And I will also, not in front of a bunch of people because of the possibility of embarrassment, but while I'm by myself, I will take this using a large spatula off of the base, and I will transfer it to a pretty plate for serving it. All right, so.
Sorry, Clara, can I quickly ask, what was the temperature we're supposed to bake it at?
325 degrees.
Okay,
now,
thanks.
you're using a 6-inch one, is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's probably going to take you about 40 minutes or so. And, you know, if you use an ice bath, maybe a little longer than that, but it's even more important that you check it for jiggle because it'll cook through that much faster.
Okay.
Jiggle is the name of the game.
Okay.
This is a perfect COVID-19 dessert as I think about it. But anyway, so at this point, unless you've made the raspberry one, in which case you're completely done, you are going to start thinking about a topping for your cheesecake. Now, I have included what you would need to make a plain sour cream topping for your cheesecake. And you can actually put the sour cream topping on the cheesecake right when it comes out of the oven, when it's still in the springform pan. You're going to mix 2 cups of sour cream with 2 tablespoons of sugar and a ½ teaspoon of vanilla and put it over. Now, the sugar content in this is debatable. Some people add up to a ¼ cup of sugar. Some add as little as a ½ cup or a tablespoon. Some add as little as a tablespoon. Kind of depends on what your sweetness level should be like. But also, it's perfectly amazing to serve just plain that way. But you can also then top it with other things like fruit, for example, fresh fruit once it's cooled off. And so, you know, you can think about what you're going to be putting on top and whether it's a sweet thing or a tart thing and whether more sugar or less sugar would be appropriate. So when you have that topping spread on top of your plain cheesecake, put your cheesecake back in the oven at 325 degrees for 10 minutes. That'll kind of just let it kind of set up a little bit. And then take it out, put it in the refrigerator the way I described, take it out of the springform pan when it's fully cooled, and you have yourself a perfectly amazing cheesecake. The raspberry one doesn't even need that. It's because of the decorating work on top, you should really just be serving it plain or with a sauce on the side. I'm going to do a really quick ganache right now for the chocolate. This is the chocolate chai one. This one is really like one that it's very deeply spiced. So it's like a very strong flavored cheesecake that I really like, but I know not everybody likes spices. So anyway, and for this one, what you do is you basically just boil 2/3 of a cup of half and half. You bring it to a boil. You're gonna pour. I'm gonna just put this on my stove. All right, and then you are going to take 1½ cups of chocolate chips. This is, for those of you who bake, you're going to recognize this is like a very simple ganache. But literally what we're going to do is we're going to bring the milk, the half and half to a boil. We're going to stir it, whisk it into the chocolate chips, and then we're just going to pour it over the cake, this fully cooled cheesecake. It's going to make a really, hopefully pretty, shiny topping. And then we're going to stick it back in the fridge to let it cool off again. And when it comes out, it'll have like a fudgy, chocolatey top on this very deeply spiced cheesecake. Now, the ganache, obviously, you wouldn't have to use it on a chocolate chai cheesecake. You could make a fruit cheesecake and put it on top. You could put it on a plain cheesecake. You could do any number of things with the chocolate topping. But personally, for me, I feel like the spices just make this a really surprising recipe, which is why I would encourage you to try it if you're adventurous. So while I'm giving that another minute to boil, I'm going to say that I felt actually a little intimidated when I was watching Melanie's blintzes being made on Monday because she had this amazing story about how her mother used to make these blintzes and they had come from the old country. And my relationship with cheesecake is actually only 2 years old. My sister got married 2 years ago, and when she and her husband announced that they were getting married, I was really excited. And I'm somebody who, when I get really excited about something, immediately does something to make my life much harder. So what I did was, when they told me that they were getting married, I immediately blurted out that I wanted to make their wedding dessert. And then they were like, oh, we would love that. And then I was like, oh no. So the way that I handled it was I came up with the idea. They had Indian food at their wedding, and I came up with the idea of making cheesecake because I knew that it's something I could make ahead of time and freeze. So I made 150 mini cheesecakes in these little glass jars. What I would do is I would, like, after my kids went to bed, I would make a batch of cheesecake, put it in the jars, throw them in the freezer, and just keep it moving. And then at the end of months and months and months of making cheesecakes, I took them all out. Well, Alex actually took them all out, put them in a cooler, and brought them to the wedding, and they were served at the wedding. It was actually, this is done. It was actually a really great way to make a dessert for a wedding. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pour this milk into the chocolate chips, and that is going to gently melt them. You don't want to put the chocolate chips on the stove because chocolate scorches really easily. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a whisk. They can see me, right? Yeah. I'm going to take a whisk, and I'm going to whisk these chocolate chips into this milk. And you probably can't see it. Alex, could you do the close-up thing again? But the chocolate chips are becoming very smooth, like a smooth sauce. Okay, and this is something, again, where you do want it to be quite smooth. But you see how quickly that came together? Now, while that's hot, you need to spread it. And then once it cools, it's going to be like a really beautiful glassy texture. It's going to look like you really knew what you were doing when you made it. Do you have a spatula? Oh, yeah. Hold on, I can use this one. All right. Oh, no, there's one right here. Okay, so I'm just going to literally take this and pour it. You know, and you don't really want to mess with ganache too much because, as I said, part of what you're going for is like a really smooth, natural looking texture to it. So if you like mess with it as it's cooling, then, you know, you're going to take away that smoothness. So what I'm actually just going to do is like make it look as good as I can in the next couple of seconds. And then I'm just going to leave it. And you can see it's already getting like a glossy sheen, even though it's literally just half and half and chocolate. And that's just going to get more and more beautiful as it cools off. And this doesn't need to cool for very long because we just put it on a cold cheesecake. I'd say this will probably be ready to eat in about an hour. All right. Here we go. Okay, so that is my tutorial on how to make cheesecake.
So would you put that cheesecake in the fridge for an hour?
So I'm going to put this cheesecake in the fridge for, well, I'm going to put it in the fridge overnight, but it'll be ready to eat in about an hour now that I put the ganache on it. And this is the only one that you kind of need to wait to put the topping on because the sour cream topping you can put on right away, and the raspberry kind of makes its own topping. So it kind of depends. But as I said before, I really love that cheesecake is such a versatile dessert because you can get very creative. I made like a rosewater and pistachio cheesecake for my sister's wedding. I made all different kinds because they were in jars. I made a mango chai, a mango cardamom. There's a whole bunch of different things that you can do. Alex, are they still there? Mm-hmm. Oh, Alex is looking for pictures of my cheesecake. You're totally stressing me out though.
Did you bake them? Did you bake them in the oven in the jam jars?
Yeah, so that was the really great thing about this, and the reason that I came up with doing it the way that I did. And I guess Alex is actually going to share you some pictures of what it looked like while I was doing it. But the great thing about it was, if you want to make cheesecakes in jam jars, that was the leg that I broke while I wasn't making cheesecake at the time. And halfway through when I was making cheesecake, I broke my leg. Don't even get me started. That's a whole other story. But anyway, so the jar idea is really great because you can put like a tablespoon of filling in there. I'm sorry, a tablespoon of graham cracker crust at the bottom. Add the filling, put it in a water bath, literally just in the jars themselves, in a water bath in your oven, and they'll take something like half an hour, I don't remember exactly, to cook up. And then you literally just transfer them, do the toppings, transfer them to your fridge and then to your freezer in the jars with the lids on top. And at that point, you can just take them out and you have individual serving cheesecakes that you can just defrost. So if you're looking for like a fundraiser or a group, a thing that you can do like for a large function, like a dessert, it's a great thing to do if you don't have a lot of ability to like do it all in one go. And it's very, very portable. Like the way that it worked at my sister's wedding was people got the cheesecake jars at the end of the night and they were able to just bring them home and eat the cheesecake at home if they weren't interested in having dessert right there. And they had like personalized tops and everything. So it was a cool little favor thing. It was a lot of fun. But yeah, just stuff. So anyway, any other questions?
Personalized tops.
Yes, those are the personalized tops.
Oh, that's so nice.
So this seems relatively easy. So where
That's
would
beautiful.
a normal person like me screw up?
Where would a person like you screw up? I think the easiest place to screw up, and the reason that I have been so emphatic, is you do not want to overcook it at all. So like, I think that somebody who makes cheesecake for the first time is going to look at the fact that it's still like very liquidy in the middle and be like, oh God, it needs more time. It probably, if you're even thinking that it might be done, then it's done. Especially when you factor in that it continues to cook once you take it out. So that, and also I think that people will often be concerned about making it, but as you just saw, it's actually really easy to do, especially if you have a blender or an electric mixer. All right. Well, thank you guys.
Yum. Thank you.
I appreciate you guys learning about this for me. It's always something that makes me think about a very special day in my life and my sister's life. I hope you're all well, and I can't wait to see you all in person someday soon.
You too.
Oh, we should post.
Bye.
Make sure you post pictures of your cheesecake on the PJC members page.
I will post pictures of yours as well. Proof of
I will.
concept. I can teach people to do things.
So the idea of using the water bath, that's for any container that's like not a spring form?
So that's a good question. You can use the water bath with a spring form pan. Some people will put some aluminum around the pan to try to discourage the water from getting in. But also, you can make the cheesecake even if a little water gets into your pan, because it's all just gonna sort of dry out as it's cooking. So yeah, but that's one thing that I did love about the jars. But yeah, you can
little metal pan. I thought that would be better because it cooks more evenly with the water bath.
Yeah, it does. So basically, what it does is it makes it more forgiving, so that you can actually like cook it for, you're not so bound by that window of time where it's jiggly, because it'll take more time before it's overcooked. So if you're worried about overcooking it, a water bath is a great way to assuage your fears and prevent the horrific event of overcooking it from happening.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, nice to see everybody. Goodbye. Thank you for coming. It means a lot to me.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Happy Shavuot.
Yes, happy Shavuot.
Bye-bye.